Hey guys, it's me Rebecca. So this will be the start of another weekly vlog, and if you saw the ending to my previous vlog, which would be the video previous to this, you would have seen that I started Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and I have done some reading of it today, and I'm on page 216, and I am definitely intrigued to see how the relationship between, oh my god, Jane. I'm so out of it. I'm so sorry. The book's called Jane Eyre. What is the female protagonist's name? Why am I like this? Oh my word. Anyway, how the relationship between Jane and Mr. Walchester will develop, because as it is acknowledged in the book by Mr. Walchester and by Jane, there is that 20-year age gap, and Mr. Walchester, we learn that he doesn't really, he doesn't want to court or be with women who are much younger than him. Like we see this when Jane is talking to Mrs. Fairfax, who is the housekeeper, how he seems to be getting along with this woman in society named, not Helen, someone else. I don't really remember her name, but she is much younger than him. Like, he is almost 40 and she's 25, and he doesn't want quarter because of that age difference. And if that's a problem now, I mean, Jane is only 18 years old, so yeah. And also, that's something else, like their positions, like Mr. Worcester, I mean, he is someone with a title who is a member of society, while Jane isn't. Like, she is an orphan, she doesn't have any family, or she's cut off any ties with her remaining family, and as well she is a governess. So when it comes to the level of, like, in the positions, like, he is superior to her. I mean, he is her boss, essentially. So yeah, and that is something that is acknowledged. Like, when Mr. Rochester and Jane are on a walk and they're talking, like, he doesn't want her to think that he sees her as his inferior. Like, he likes talking to her, and yeah, so I am curious about that. I am also curious about who is out to, like, get him, because there's an instance where Jane, she's trying to sleep and she's awoken by a sound of laughter or footsteps, someone trying to open her door, and then when she opens her door, she sees there was a candle left behind, and she goes into Mr. Worcester's room, which isn't far from her own, and she sees that his bed's on fire, and so someone or something is out to get him, and there's something about someone on a different level of the house. I think it's like the third level, and this servant who spends all of her time in a particular room in the house and only comes out of that room like for an hour a day to eat breakfast or to have a meal, really, with the other servants, or have a meal in general. And it wouldn't be a question, like, it might be like that's where she does assigned work, but for some reason she is paid more than the other servants, so there's that. I'm very much intrigued about that. And yeah, and we do see how Jane, she's drawn to Mr. Worcester. Like, yes, she admits that he's not the most attractive guy, but there's something about him that just draws her in to him, like the way he speaks and the way he acts, the way he not challenges her, but yeah, their conversations. And also, she does admit that he is moody, which doesn't offend her, because that's just how he is. Like, she does acknowledge that he's a man who's very flawed and not perfect, and there's a lot of things that should be quite questionable. I mean, a moodiness, like, I would say that might be a red flag in today's society if someone's extremely moody, because how that might be mood. Yeah, and with that moodiness, I'm mentioning it now because when she, I guess, properly meets him, like when she knows who he is, Like, he is really because of the fact he got injured. Like, he has his sprained foot. Like, and that's one. I mean, his bride might be injured as well, but yeah. But while they're having dinner with Mrs. Fairfax and Adele, like, he does start his interrogation of her. He wants to know her history, her qualifications, like to know her skill properly and he has her show her skills by playing the piano, which is like, man, it's slightly above average, and to show her portfolio of drawings she's made, which he doesn't really say anything about. She's the one who's more self-critical about that. So yeah, and also we do learn a bit more about some information about him, how he was only made Mr. Rochester, I guess, somewhat recently, like in the past 9 years after his older brother passed away, and that their father did want him to be in position, and I guess something happened, like his elder brother and his father put him in this like painful position for the sake of making his fortune, and Mrs. Fairfax, when she's explaining this to Jane, tells Jane that she doesn't know the full detail about the exact position, but it broke something in his spirit and it did have an effect on him. And we do learn. I was curious in the last video if he might have some parentage with Adele, and he did have a relationship with Adele's mother. He was in love with her. He thought she was in love with him when really, and he was disproven that when he saw she was disloyal. Like, she told him that Adele is his child, and he doesn't really see it. He doesn't believe her. So he, in a way, disowned Adele by not believing her mother or anything, with her telling him who the father is. But still, he took Adele in when he learned that her mother just left her in an orphanage and went off, like, and that is really messed up. And and one last thing I want to say is that even though Jane knows that she and Mr. Rochester could never be together because of their different positions in society, she's still quite jealous of the other woman, even though he's not gonna go for it because of the fact she's 25 years old, like, and he's almost 40, as he says. So yeah, and we see how she tries to hone in her jealousy by drawing both this woman from the details she got about her from Mrs. Fairfax and herself, and I guess compared the two. And yeah, and so far and with me being on page 216, I did reach a point where Mr. Rochester, he's coming back to Thornfield after being away for a couple of weeks with a few people from society, including this woman. So I am curious about that interaction as well. What Jane will say about when she sees this woman close up, if how Mrs. Fairfax described this woman is accurate. And yeah, so far I'm less intrigued, and really I'm thinking I'm most intrigued is like, what is this about, like, that weird laughter, who might be the servant or might be another character or someone else that Mr. Rochester wants hidden away. I mean, I think with this being a well-known classic, a lot of people have an idea of what's happening, but I'm very much intrigued to see, like, timeline, like, and all of the events that lead up to us, like, learning exactly about Mr. Rochester and other things. I'm not gonna spoil it if you've not heard anything about Jane Eyre, but yeah, I feel like Jane Eyre is a book that's talked about pretty often, I guess. I don't really know, but yeah. And yeah, I think that's all for now, so I'll see you when So it's the next day, and it's quite gloomy day. Like, it's been raining for most of the day, and I think it has stopped us now, but yeah, but I have done some work, and I did do some reading of Jane Eyre, and I finished volume 1, and with volume 2, at least with my edition, I'm not sure about like other editions, but when I had volume 2, it seems like the page count like restarted, because volume 1, I'm just gonna show you, because volume 1, as you can see, ends on page 312. You flip to volume 2, and I don't know how, if you can see that, yeah, but it says page 2, so it seems like the page number just restarts, so yeah, I'm just gonna be saying that from now on, I guess, so yeah, sorry. And it's a good thing I remember I'm on the beginning of part 2, because I just forgot to put my bookmark back in, so yeah. But so far I am, I guess, intrigued to really learn exactly what is up with Mr. Rochester and whatnot, but let me backtrack. Is that we see as Jane, she denied the fact she's in love with Mr. Rochester because of the fact they're of different levels in society, and he is expected to marry someone who is at his level of society, and we need to marry for like family, for politics, for connections and whatnot, and marry someone who is of his rank. Like, he will never marry someone like who is lower than him like Jane is, but Jane, she cannot help herself but to be in love with him, like, and it's gotten to the point where it's like it's said differently in a book, but it's like beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, essentially. And to Jane, Mr. Rochester, like, he might be objectively an ugly person, like she isn't, but to her he is good looking, and as well she's forgetting all of his faults, his flaws and everything, and it's like seeing him as this perfect man. And she is jealous of this lady, a Miss Ingram, who she has gotten a better look of, and Mrs. Fairfax says did do a pretty good job in describing her. Who Miss Ingram, like, it doesn't seem like if she does marry Mr. Rochester that the two will get along, because Miss Ingram isn't a fan of Adele, and she doesn't really seem like to be the sort of person who treats governesses well, and she kind of would like to send Adele away to like a school and not deal with governesses, so yeah, that would be a bit complicated. So yeah, I'm just trying to see if I know if there's anything else about that, and not really. And I do have to say the banter between Mr. Rochester and Jane at times is pretty funny, because their banters is quite amusing to read in different sections of the book. Like, yeah, I think that's all I'm gonna say for that romantic department. But plot-wise, a man shows up to Thornfield while Mr. Rochester is out in town, and he wants to see him. And Mr. Rochester later like sneaks back in dressed as like a gypsy, which, and that's just how it's described. And he tells his servant to tell the guests that they won't leave until they meet the fortunes of all the women in the like dining room, and that includes Jane. And some of the female guests, like, they get fortunes that they are happy with, and others they are not. But with Jane, she is at the end of her session and is like, wait a minute, Mr. Rochester, is that you? And yeah, it's him, and it was just quite amusing reading that. And his demeanor changes when he learns that Mr. Mason, the gentleman, is there. Like, he has Jane go back into the dining room to bring him a glass of wine and really see how the other guests are behaving with Mr. Mason, and he is worried when Jane comes back and tells him that everyone seems happy and is after that. If the mood's suddenly gone like depressed, like, he is fearing the worst of Miss. And it seems like Mr. Mason has something, has something on Mr. Rochester that if the other guys learned about it would just cause them to view him in a negative light. But once he learns that everyone seems happy, it's like, okay. So yeah, and as we see of them is that Mr. Rochester is leading Mr. Mason to his room, and that's it. And the next morning, like very early, the other guys are awoken by the sound of his screams, and Jane hears someone pleading for help and whatnot, and Mr. Rochester assures the guests that everything was fine. He was just rehearsing for a play, and Jane's still very suspicious of this, and Mr. Rochester does come and get her, and they go up to the 3rd floor where Mr. Mason is. And he is injured. He apparently has some scratch marks or something. I don't know, but Mr. Rochester leaves Jane with him while he grabs his surgeon. And when he and the surgeon come back, Mr. Mason and Mr. Rochester are talking about a woman who attacked Mr. Mason and how Mr. Rochester was like that he shouldn't have seen her without him and whatnot, and the whole thing's just like weird. Like Jane isn't wondering who this lady is. I'm assuming she's assuming that it's Grace, the servant, but still she's not questioning it, and I'm just like, what are they? I mean, there's no other time to be having this conversation, but still, but yeah, the surgeon is able to patch up Mr. Mason as best he does, and Mr. Rochester puts him in a carriage before the other guys reawaken, I guess, to this new day, and has Mr. Mason go back to Jamaica where he did come from, and yeah, and before Jane and Mr. Rochester go back into the house, Mr. Rochester, he's talking about his error he made when he was away, like this, away from the house, like on a voluntary like retreat, I guess. I don't know how to describe it. And this error he is still dealing with the consequences of. And yeah, that's really that, and we hear of that. And with Jane, she gets word that her cousin John was waking up with a lot of debt. He tried to pursue his mother to sell him the house, give him the money like he was entitled to as the only like man of the house, and his mother refused, wasn't able to because of her own debts, and then John dies, and they assume that it was by his own hand. And alongside, when Mrs. Reed hears about this, and alongside other issues in her life, it did cause her to have a stroke, and they did think she would be okay, but it seems like her condition has degraded, and she is dying, and she has been asking for Jane, and Jane is able to take a leave of absence to go see her cousins, who she hasn't seen in about a decade, and who she swore she will never see again or never deal with again. And when she gets to that house, to Gateshead, I believe it was called, Mrs. Reed, like, she has moments when she knows where she is and she knows who's in the room and whatnot, but moments when her mind is elsewhere, and those moments are where, and Jane, she is able to see Mrs. Reed in one of these moments, and before she dies, Mrs. Reed does tell her some of her regrets, and she did want to make things up with Jane Eyre, but not make things up, but kind of like, oh my god, what is it? I want to say, what is the word? There's a word that I want to say that I'm just like, will come to me in a couple hours, and that's gonna be annoying. But I guess clear the air with Jane. I don't really know. But yeah, Jane in a way forgives her. I guess like she does call Mrs. Reed aunt, which is something she swore she will never do again. And yeah, Mrs. Reed dies, and we also see we see before that like Jane interacting with her female cousins, how one cousin seems to be like a party girl, sort of. Another is a very the kind of Christian who goes to church numerous times a week and sometimes numerous times a day. And this cousin, like, she said she made sure all of her accounts were good and that she's able to retire properly. And then when their mother died, she's cutting off her sister. Like, there is tension between these cousins, and the whole thing was just amusing to read. And you see how Jane and her cousin seem to get along once they see that Jane is a pretty talented artist. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, volume 1 did end with Mrs. Reed dying, and I guess I am curious to see how this will affect Jane, if it will have an effect on her, because even if Mrs. Reed treated her horribly, I mean, she was still family, and her cousins are still her cousins. Like, family is family, no matter how complicated things are. So I'm curious if that will have an effect on Jane, and I'm also curious, again, really just to see more of her, I guess, this relationship she is having or will probably have with Mr. Rochester, if the feelings will, how that will develop, and also learn more about this woman that attacked Mr. Mason. So yeah, I kind of do have some idea of what will happen, but I'm just curious on the events that will lead up to all of this kind of being undisclosed. So yeah, I think that's all for now. So I'll see. So it's the next day, and I've just done some work and whatnot, and I did do a bit of reading of Jane Eyre, and I'm on page 62 of part 1, but in the book, like, I'm this far in, like, so yeah, I don't know. Like I mentioned yesterday, the page number restarted and I did not keep track, so my bad. But Jane, she spends like about a month in Gateshead after her aunt dies. It's really just to help out her cousins, like pack up their things to leave. Like, one cousin, Georgina, is able to to live with her uncle, her mother's brother, and I don't remember, I think London, I want to say, but. And Jane, at the end of the section, does give, like, I guess, an update on her cousins, as it is the last time we see them, and this one does marry. And it takes a bit longer to help her other cousin, Eliza. Like, Jane almost serves as, like, the person who greets people and handles people who come and visit Gateshead, like, to, like, I guess, show sympathy for the death of Dawn, while Eliza packs up her things. Eliza, she is planning to head to the continent, to this town, to go to a nunnery so that she can devote herself to studying Roman Catholic dogmas before going to a convent in France, which she does. So yeah, there's that, and I'm assuming that's the last time we see Jane in Gateshead. And Jane, when she gets back to Thornfield, she learns that Mr. Rochester, he bought a carriage, which typically means he is about to be wed, and she thinks that it will be to Lady Ingram, and she knows that with this marriage she'll have to find new employment, because Lady Ingram's kind of made her thoughts clear on what she thinks of governesses, and that she will send Adele to a school, and yeah. And Mr. Rochester, he kind of leads Jane to believe that's the case. Like, he tells Jane that he found employment for her in Ireland, which is like quite far, and a place he'll never go to because he's not a fan of Ireland, so it means they'll never see each other again. And this does break her heart because, like, she's in love with him, and so Mr. Rochester's like, I'm not marrying Lady Ingram. I was planning to marry you. So, yeah, so he proposes, she accepts this proposal, and he also admits, like, later on that he actually was feigning a courtship with Lady Ingram just to make Jane jealous, and I'm not sure if this is correct. Apparently, Jane's full name is Janet, which is something like, or that's what he calls her, which I don't know if that was a thing. Yeah, and I do like with the fact there are different levels of in society. Like he tries to almost spoil Jane. Like he buys her, he tries to give her lavish things. Like he has jewels and a bank, and he was talking to his banker in London about sending some over. He was gonna like spoil her of them and whatnot, and she's like, please do not do that. Like it was the idea of like wow, like something she's never had before. This in a way not frightens her, but it's like she's never really had wealth, and I guess it's just something she's not used to, or you know, like she I guess is more for someone who's always had, I guess, simple stuff. No, that's not the right term, but it's like she's always had things that are necessities, like her dresses, everything she owned when she came to foreign field she owned because it was necessary for her to own it, and such things like she's never owned it before, so it's like this whole new thing that in a way frightens her. Like Mr. Rochester, he tries to buy her like lavish silks and whatnot, and like stuff that's quite like out there, and she's like, no, buy yourself something, make yourself something with that. Is buy me something like you can buy silk, I think it is, but in like dark colors. Like she still wants hold of things she's used to, but also I'm saying the reason she's also someone who's trying to hold on to some freedom because she's like, even through her status like in the house has changed. Like people know that Mr. Rochester is engaged to Jane or not, and it seems like with Mrs. Fairfax, who was initially worried because of the fact, like, I mean, as Mrs. Fairfax points out, Mr. Rochester's in a higher position in society than Jane, but also that 20-year age gap. Like Mrs. Fairfax actually insists that he is old enough to be her father, and Jane, who's never really had a father or like I guess proper parental figure, like she's had people she's looked up to, but it's like not supervisors, like people who guide her. There is a term that's like, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I'm not able to think about it. It's so but she's never had it, and the way Mr. Rochester, from what she knows actually about her father, he's nothing like. So yeah, Mrs. Fairfax does come along, but despite that, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I went off the wheels a bit. But anyway, she is determined to be governess, like earned, I think it's like £30 or something. She does a month just by doing this and saving up. And yeah, I do like that. And I also like I guess it's supposed to be the day of her marriage. She's like sitting in her room, like waiting to be, getting ready, and Mr. Rochester, he's had her things packed up because after the wedding they are gonna go to London before going on their honeymoon to France and Italy and whatnot, and he on her trunks has Mrs. Rochester Hotel London written on them, and I guess like she's not the most happy because to her she doesn't feel like she's Mrs. Rochester yet. Like, there's this quote on page 46 that I did like, and it means, she did not exist. She will not be born till tomorrow, sometime after 8 o'clock a.m., and I would wait to be assured she had come into the world alive before I assigned to her all that property. It's like, she's waiting until like papers are signed, until she is in church saying I do before she accepts the fact, like, she's Mrs. Rochester. In a way, she's waiting for the other shoe to drop. She's waiting for something to go wrong, that would prevent her from being Mrs. Rochester. Like, and that line, she will not be born tomorrow. Initially, I read that as it's almost like she's being reborn from this like single woman into married life. Like, she's kind of being reborn and moving into a new phase in life. And not so later that I reread something that seems like to have happened sometime the night before or a few nights before. I'm not entirely sure about the timeline. I might have gotten something mixed up. But she tells Mr. Rochester that when he comes back, like, how she was worried about him because he was out at one of his firms handling some business before going to London, and she was asleep, and then she was woken up by the sight of this woman in her room, and it was like a woman she didn't recognize. It was none of the Sortons. It was definitely not this Grace Poirot, who she is very suspicious of, but this strange woman who was by her closet looking her wedding dress, putting on the veil that he bought for her for the dress. And suddenly this woman like yanked off the veil, whipped it in half when she saw Jane. And this woman was very much aware that Jane saw her because she got up to her, and Jane wasn't really able to see her face properly besides describing it as almost like a nightmare, like very disturbing, very like creepy almost. And the woman, like, when she gets up to Jane, it's just like blows out a candle, so Jane is in complete darkness. And Mr. Rochester, he's just like trying to convince Jane, oh, it was just a bad dream. It was just, you're being a bit hysterical, like you're just being, it's this nerves, like, it's this mental terror. This is his exact line, and it's like, no. Like, Jane is actually like, there is proof, there is that torn up veil, like I said when I woke up on the floor. And he's like, okay, I believe you. Like, I don't know why I'm going high pitch, but still, this whole thing is just, so, yeah, again, yeah, that's where I'm at now. I'm on page 62, chapter, I don't even know, I cannot read woman numeral, but I am definitely intrigued to see what will go wrong, if something goes wrong for this wedding. So, yeah, I think that's all from now. So it's the next day, and I've done some work and whatnot. I also did go outside. It's extremely warm for, like, I guess the middle. What is today's date? Today is the 19th of March, so the middle of March. Like, it's 66 degrees. It's nice. It's beautiful. Like, yeah, but I have been inside doing work, and I just woken up from a nap. Like a couple hours ago. Usually, like, if I nap in the day, I'm out of it. So for a bit before I come to my senses, or yeah. But I did do quite a bit of reading yesterday and today of Jane Eyre, and I'm on page 158. I'm just gonna show you where I am. Like, I'm almost done. Like, I see myself probably finishing this in a couple days' time. Like, I don't think I'll be finished reading 120 pages in one day of this book. Like, and I typically don't even read 100 pages of a book. But yeah, but the day of the wedding is here, and Mr. Rochester, like, he seems to be in a hurry to get this over with, which was a bit weird. But when he and Jane arrive at the church, which isn't far from Thornfield, Jane notices these two men outside, and they enter the church through a side door, and they're just like inside staring at some stuff in the church. And during the ceremony, when the clergyman is like, if anyone objects to this union or knows of a reason for, like, knows of an impediment that would prevent this marriage to take place, say now. And typically, like, you would hope no one objects. And at the last second, right before he's about to move on to the next part, one of these men objects and he says there's an impediment for why this marriage cannot take place, and it's because Mr. Rochester's already married. He's already wedded, and his wife is still alive. And you can imagine the questions of that. And this gentleman, he introduces himself as a lawyer, and we also learned that the second gentleman with him is Mr. Mason. And Mr. Rochester, like, he for a second thinks of denying it, but he's like, no, he doesn't even try to deny it. He's like, yeah, she's alive. And he takes her off them to the house and shows her. And we learned that Grace is a nurse of a kind who was hired to, like, look out for Bertha, for Mrs. Rochester, and, like, to prevent her from harming herself and harming others, to really be her prisoner and keep her trapped in on the third floor room to prevent Bertha from causing harm. And yeah, and the wedding, you can imagine, is called off, and we learn that this lawyer, he's an acquaintance of Jane's uncle who is dying, and Mr. Mason, he was staying with this uncle, like, recovering while before going back to Jamaica, and he happened to be there when the uncle received an invitation that Jane is to be married to Mr. Rochester, and, you know, thing is, and also Mr. Mason is the woman's brother, so. And Jane, she's mourning, she's upset about it, so you can imagine, and she realizes that I think at one point she feels like God, like, abandoned her. The next day, she kind of stumbles upon Mr. Rochester in the library, and he was just sitting there waiting for her, and he explains everything, how his father and his brother, his father was friends with Bertha Mason's father, and the two had this arrangement for him and her to wed. And for Mr. Rochester's father and brother, about 30,000 pounds, I want to say it was. I didn't know I did on my notes. And yeah, so it's an arranged marriage. He goes over, and that family, like, they did deceive him in a sense. They said that the mother was dead when really she was in a madhouse. They also didn't allow Bertha to be alone with Mr. Rochester. They also had her charming, like, to charm him, and he thought he was in love with her. And it was only until it was too late that he realized he did not know her whatsoever. Like, it was only after the fact that after they wed, that he learned that she was also mad, that she had some mental illness, I believe. I don't know what it is. Yeah, it was just too late. And he also learned that his father and brother knew about this, but they didn't care. Like, money was all they cared about. So yeah, and some time passed, and he was living in Jamaica with his wife and her family for a while before coming back to England after his brother and father passed away, and he essentially brought her to Thornfield, had her locked up, hired Grace, and dealt with the rest of the staff. So yeah. And he tries to persuade Jane to stay in Thornfield. Like, it's just, the whole scene was just really messed up, and this, I don't want to be manipulative, but Jane, she decides to leave Thornfield. Like, she's so brokenhearted and I guess embarrassed because of what she went through, and the fact, like, now everyone knows that she was, like, and I also feel bad for her because Mr. Rochester, like, he viewed Jane to be the exact opposite as Bertha, and that's why he wanted to marry her, because she was so different to this mad woman that he was drawn to her. And he claims he was actually in love with her, but yeah, well, that was a really bad piece of my mouth. And I mean, and also he does literally does ask her to forgive him, and she instantly does, and that whole thing, like, she was deceived. She wasn't exactly lied to, but he did keep this very important thing from her. He wasn't very open with her. Like, this reminded me of the fact she is 18, almost 19 years old. Like, she's extremely young in a way naive, and like it was just like a bit of young love. That whole scene where like but even if she forgave him, she cannot be with him because of the fact he is married, and she refuses to be his mistress essentially. So there's that, and she does make the decision to leave Thornfield like in very early in the morning, like right before anyone is awake, just to like spare the goodbye, spare him trying to persuade her to stay. Like, and yeah, she leaves, and she's able to hitch a ride on this wagon that's going. I don't remember where it was, but the guy dropped her off early because he wanted 30 shillings. She only had 20, so yeah, she's at this hair lot where there's no one around, and she just sleeps there. And she goes through this tough time where she's quite vulnerable, like in the sense she has to she has to walk to this village, and there she seeks food, she seeks employment. She's able to get some food from very generous people, but no one is able to offer her employment, and she realizes this, and after a couple of days she moves on, and she finds this house where it's these two women and their housekeeper, and the housekeeper tries to turn her away, but the women are like, no, invite her in, and one of them, I don't know, she uses this alias of Jane Eyre, like I guess she just wanted to distance herself from her past and start anew, but yeah, I mean, and their brother does show up, and he is suspicious of her, but she discloses some of her history, but not everything, and he's able to find her job because the family came together to mourn the death of their father, but after some time after the mourning period's over, they have to go back to normal life. Like the sisters, who both of them work in London as governesses, and the brother, he is a priest, I believe, and he has his own work he has to do, and the brother, he's planning to just close up the house, and and he just happened to be starting up the school for girls in the village. Like, there are girls who some probably uneducated families, and like he thinks it's something that's below Jane's like standards, the way he talks about it. And I don't know, Jane accepts immediately. Like, she's in a position that she's doing what she loves, which is teaching, and something she's good at, and it will allow her to start anew. So I'm curious to see how that will go, and I am just curious on what the last 128 pages have for us. So yeah, that's all for now. So it's the next day, and I did do quite a bit of work, and the temperature did cool down a bit, but yeah, and I have done quite a bit of reading because Jane Eyre put me on page 238 of part 2, aka like this bit towards me is the bit I've left. Like, I have 40 pages, about less than 50 pages of Jane Eyre. And what I want first that we see how Jane, she settles into this new role as like a teacher to local girls. Like, we see how St. John, who is the one who helped her get this position, he thinks it's below her, that she's meant for greater, better things, but it's like she doesn't care. Like, she wants this new start in a place where she knows nobody knows her, and that's where like there's a new story from Mr. Rochester, and finally have some independence for once, because I think this is also like the first time she's really had some sort of freedom. Like, she lived with her aunt who was. Then she was at Lowland, I think that school is called, where she did have some freedom, but she also had a very like I guess set routine, strict routine that was kind of mandated by the teachers there. And then at Thornfield, like she did have freedom in how she spent time when she was in tutoring Adele, but she still had to be with Mr. Rochester in a sense that he was still her boss and love interest. And yeah, and she doesn't have to worry about any of that. No one having to control her or anything. So, yeah, and we see how there's this barrier between her and her pupils initially. Like her pupils, they mainly come from uneducated families. Like they're probably the first people in their family to receive a formal education. And then there's Jane, who is formally educated. Like she did go to school, so there's that barrier. Like they don't know how to communicate with one another. Like they speak different languages essentially. And over time, like the barrier comes down, and I kind of wish we saw more of Jane's relationship with her pupils. Like we saw of her relationship with Adele, because Adele and Jane did form this close bond, and I know it's impossible to do that with as many girls there is in school, but still I would have liked to see how Jane taught them in this formal setting, like properly, because I don't think we really saw that. And yeah, go over my notes again, and yeah, like John just continues to be doubtful for questioning if if it's too much for her living situation, like, and if it's also her situation is also disappointing her, and she's like, no, she's just grateful, like that's what I really. And there's this bit where you see Jane kind of play matchmaker between St. John and Rosamond, who is the daughter to the person who set up the school. John fancies her, it seems like, has like a bit of a crush on her, and it's like, but with John, he once become a missionary and help people, and as well his desire, his need to be closer to God stands in the way of him actually pursuing Rosalind. Like he thinks she is better than him, and then she won't choose him. Like she has other suitors who are pursuing her, so he doesn't really see a chance. Jane tries to persuade him to do it, and that was a whole ordeal. And we do learn that John, he does learn eventually who Jane is, in a sense. A lawyer who worked with her uncle wrote to John to inform him that Jane's uncle died, and the uncle was looking for Jane to give her all the inheritance. And the thing is with this uncle, he is the brother to John's mother, who we learn was the sister to Jane's father. So Jane and John's sisters, Diana and oh my god, what is her other name? I'm sorry to see, but yeah, they're all related. They're cousins. So this makes Jane happy because like she finally has family who she likes. And then Jane just inherited about £20,000, and that shocked her. Like she's like, did you read that number wrong? It could have been 2,000. And no, it's actually 20,000, like in word wise, not number wise. And that shocks Jane. And she decides to do what she thinks is right, because John and his sisters, they thought they were gonna inherit the money, and Uncle wrote to them and he said, no, I have someone else who's inheriting the money. So yeah, Jane decides to also be nice and show her, I guess, gratefulness towards this new found family she has. And she splits the money 4 ways, so everyone gets £5,000. And yeah, and John, he tries to tell her she shouldn't, and she decides she will. So yeah, and some time passes and the school ends up closing, and meaning Jane has more freedom to really just persuade whatever she wants. And John thinks that Jane needs a purpose. That she can wander around, be aimless, like he thinks she needs a purpose. So yeah, he continues to watch her, to study her, and eventually he asks her to accompany him to India. The thing is, he wants her to marry him because apparently that's the only way to do so, with her being ill, and the only way to protect her from the life, or I'm not gonna use that term, but I guess, but no, as he says, the savages in India. And Jane doesn't want to do that, like, because I mean, they're cousins, but really she views him as like a brother. Like she views him as her adopted brother, and she tries to persuade they can go to India together as brother and sister. And he's like, no, we're not actually brother and sister. Like he's very set on the fact that she marry him, and she doesn't want to be because of that, but also because she doesn't love him, and she doesn't want to marry someone who she doesn't love. Which in this time period, I mean, with I guess her level in society, or position in society, she is able to do that. I mean, assuming if she was in a higher position, then she would have to marry others, but I see if she was in a higher position, she'd still try to marry for love. Yeah, she rejects him, tries to persuade him into other ways, and he's just so set in the fact she married him. Eventually, he just becomes very cold towards her when we move, and yeah, he's just hoping that she changes her mind. And yeah, on page 238, which is in the middle of a word, because he is planning to go to Cambridge and then he's coming back hoping that she might change her mind. And I'm just wondering how that will play out. And again, I'm wondering if Mr. Rochester will come back. So yeah, that's it for now. So it's the next day and I did some work and whatnot. I did finish Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and I liked this. I gave it 4 stars, and yeah. And what I wrote today was that Shane and John, like, he keeps trying to get Jane to marry him and whatnot, and eventually she tells him she'll think about it while he's in Cambridge, and she says on page 239, were I but convinced that it is God's will to marry you, I could vow to marry you, and now basically saying, I'll think about it, and if it is God's plan, it will happen. And yeah, that makes him happy. But like a second later, she hears, Jane! And who is it? It's Mr. Rochester calling for her, and she runs outside screaming, where are you? He's not there. It's a whole weird thing, and yeah, she decides to go back to Cornfield to see him, and when she gets there, she sees it's in ruins, it's been burned down, and it's like, it's this destroyed. And she asks the host of like the hotel bed and breakfast situation she's at what happened, and he tells her that Mrs. Rochester got out of her one visit. Grace Poole might have been a good nurse, but a lot of nurses, including her, have this habit of keeping a small bottle of gin on them, and yeah, she was asleep, and when Bertha, Mrs. Rochester, was able to take the keys from her and escaped once more, and Mrs. Rochester, for some reason, set fire to Jane's rooms, even though Jane hasn't been there for some time. We do learn that after Jane left Mr. Rochester, he cut himself from society, and he hasn't been out at all. He's just basically isolated himself in the house. He sent Adele to school. He sent Mrs. Fairfax to live with some friends. He let go of most of the servants in the house, and there's a very small number of servants, and the fire did spread, and Mr. Rochester, he was able to get out and get all of the servants out of the house, and he did go back in because Mrs. Rochester, she somehow managed to get onto the roof, and he went after her to get her down, and she fell to her death, and he fell, and he was like crushed, but he was injured, but he didn't die, but he did lose an eyeball. His hand ended up being amputated, and I think his other eye got infected so badly that it clouded up. So yeah, there is that. And Jane goes to his new residence where he's living with a long-time servant and the servant's wife. And when he learns Jane is there, he thinks she is a fragment of his imagination until he holds her and realizes it's her. Like, he's like, I know these limbs. And it's like all dramatic. Like, it was this a bit ridiculous to read. Like, but yeah, and she tells him what she's been up to the past year. She just kind of downplayed the few days where she was hungry and homeless, and and she tells him about this newfound family, and he thinks she should have stayed with John as Mr. Rochester is now crippled, and he cannot see her. He's physically not a man he once was, and Jane refuses, saying she doesn't love St. John the way she loves Mr. Rochester, and he asks her to marry him, and she says yes, and we see that wedding day, and we see how they kind of just, I guess, move on with their lives. I guess, like, they have a kid. His white eye does clear up a bit, so he is able to see somewhat, and he's not entirely dependent on others to help him get around. Like, he has some of his independence back, and she learns that on that day she heard his voice. He did call out for her while he was like asleep, and I'm guessing, I don't remember, no, this was after the fire, I'm guessing, and that he did hear her respond. So that was a bit weird. Like, was that God's way of saying they're meant to be? Like, showing Jane this is his plan after she told St. John she'll marry him if it's God's plan? Like, was God trying to get them together? Like, I don't know, this is interesting to say the least. And we also do learn about, like, her other family, like how Diana and Mary, her female cousins, they do marry and they seem happy, and then we do learn that St. John never did marry, that he did go to India, and the book ends with her knowing that the next letter she'll receive is someone informing her that St. John is dead, because he did write that he thinks soon he'll be going to be with God and whatnot. So overall I enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. And I did start a new book, which is When Women Were Dragons by Callie Barnhill, and this takes place in 1955, and we follow this girl named Alex, and we start with, like, I guess, prior to this massive event called the Mass Dragoning of 1955, where hundreds of thousands of women sprouted wings and scales and talons and took to the sky. And the part I'm at, which is page 48, is we just got that event, and I'm guessing we will be seeing the aftermath and whatnot. But with this, Alex is infected because her beloved aunt did transform into a dragon, but her mother did not, and Alex doesn't know why. It's taboo to speak of this subject, so and so far as I'm on page 48, there are some things that are quite interesting. Let me just pull my notes up, and it seems like we start this novel with this woman. She's writing to her mother, and like, this woman's in a position where she doesn't have any power whatsoever, and she seems very unhappy in this position. Like, she was told she had to marry, and that's what she did. She was kind of, I guess, forced to marry this guy her mother claimed, oh, she can make a strong man into a better man, and that wasn't the case. And it seems like the women who end up transforming into dragons are unhappy because they are forced or expected to fit into a mold created by society, and sometimes their circumstances make them miserable. Like, it's like women who have to give up their careers to become wives and mothers, or the men, or have to give up their careers because men were coming back from the war and they need jobs. So it's also women whose husbands are violent, women who have gone injustice due to men's behavior. Like, we see like one event when these women working on some phone servicing, I don't remember what it was exactly. They filed a complaint against a supervisor, a men's supervisor, and the police came, interviewed them and whatnot, and nothing was done about it. So yeah, it's like, it's really women whose positions that prevent them from having power. And we see Alexis, or Alexandria, like, her father and mother tried to be proper members of society and call her Alexandria. Ron calls her Alex, and when she's younger we see that she prefers being called Alex. But we see how her mother and her aunt, they're opposites. Like, her aunt fights these standards, like, and the way she is a bit, I guess, different in terms of what society expects of her. Like, she is someone who wears trousers all the time, like even to church, even food. That's not really allowed in the area she's living in during this time, but she has this air about her that's like, oh yeah, people think, oh yeah, she's allowed to do that. So we see that she works as a mechanic, and then part of that she was part of some Air Force team in the military, but before something happened and she had to be a mechanic, and she continued to be a mechanic after the war, and she didn't really want to marry and have children until, well, I don't know exactly why she did that way. If it's like she tried to get back into her sister's good graces, because the two had a somewhat falling out over Mara's ways until she married and seemed to wake up, because honestly the husband is a drunken. I mean, Alex does love her cousin Beatrice, like, she's obsessed with Beatrice. Like, Alex, when we first see her in around the time of this event happening is about 8, and she just loves her baby cousin so much. Like, seeing how she's obsessed with her cousin is just really cute. And yeah, and with Alex's mother, it seems like she's accepted that this is just the way it is. Like, she's supposed to fit into this mold, and that's it. Like, Mara likes to complain about the fact that Alex's mother is a brilliant person, but yet because of the fact she's a woman, she didn't get honors when she graduated from university. She didn't get into her master's program because she's a woman. And Mara keeps saying how brilliant Alex's mother is. She's a magician, she's extremely brilliant in math, like all of this stuff. And yet Alex's mother did quit her career to become a wife and mother, and I guess we see how her and Mara constantly are fighting. And with Alex's family, like, we start the novel from Alex's perspective, like, before the dragoning event occurred, but we really start when Alex's mother comes back from being away for a while. Like, it's never explained where she's at, but when she comes back, she's like a shadow of herself. Like, she's this extremely fragile creature who Alex did not recognize whatsoever. And we see how Alex stumbles on her aunt taking care of her mother, how her mother has these like scratches on her. Like, there's a lot of things that's a bit odd. And eventually, like, Alex's mother does return to her former self and is more of who she is. But yeah, and we also see how Alex's family, like, they're obsessed with maintaining, like, not a reputation, but a certain way of life. Like, her father is quite strict, and he's like, honestly, reading from his perspective, this, like, it is 1955, and he actually did say, like, that the spot Alex's mother had in university should have gone to a boy, and it seems like he's against Alex going to university, and that's, like, besides, and he expects Alex just to be a wife and a mother. That's it. Like, and they also expect Alex to behave a certain way at the dinner table, like to sit there for 10 minutes, and like, even though she's like, what the hell is going on? Like, she just wants to go play like a child, but not they have to sit there. They expect her to sit there and be quiet. So yeah, and where I ended was the dragoning effect and the dragoning, like, event, and where all of these women, like, they turn into dragons, and we do learn that Alex is on the turn into a dragon, and we do learn that this is told, like, much later in life, and we learn that Alex, she became, like, a scientist and to figure out what happened and everything. And yeah, and what I do like is this dragoning thing. It seems like this is the what was it again? It was like the largest dragoning event that's occurred. Like, this is the most amount of women who've turned into dragons, and there's been times where a number of women have turned into dragons, but there's this, like, censorship placed on people who try to research it or, like, report on it. Like, we learn that scientists and specialists, like, if they try to do any research into it, they will lose their jobs. We see after this event how news stations, when they try to report it, the film will be taken or hidden, and if it is aired, it will be taken out immediately, and the station will be hit by a fine and suspended, like, causing people to lose an income. And it's like, the censorship is quite interesting to learn more and more about, and really we do learn this sort of thing. It can be traced back to centuries before to, like, I want to say it's like 1300 BC, or I could be so wrong, but yeah, it's just an event, something that's always been there, and people don't talk about it because it's something that scares them, and it's like something that they just don't want to believe is something that can happen. But also, it's a subject that's very feminine. Like, that is, like, something that's taboo. Like, I don't know, it's this really interesting to discuss. Like, it's like, I guess it's like talking about periods. I guess, like, it's like something that women go through, or women can go through, that's like, it's a women thing. We don't want to talk about it. No, thank you. So yeah, the fact it's like a known fact, and like if someone knows someone who turned into a dragon, like, people in the neighborhood will just forget about them. Like, Alex had this neighbor when she was younger who we suspect did turn into a dragon. Like, she showed up in a lady's yard one day, and instead of the woman, it was a dragon, and who flew away. Like, no one talked about this neighbor again. The house was boarded up. Yeah, it's just something no one talks about, which is quite interesting. Like, I am curious to see how this event will be handled, and really, like, I'm curious to see the aftermath, if Alex will try and do her own research into what happened, and she will ask questions that will make a lot of people very uncomfortable. Like, I am interested in I do enjoy the subject of censorship because it is something that's extremely relevant. So, yeah, I think that's all for now. So it's the next day, and as you saw, I did go out today. I decided to go to like the main street area of my town just because there's supposed to be this like Women International Day like event, which I know it's a couple weeks late, but that's just how it was. And I don't know, the event was quite small and yeah, I don't know, but I decided since the weather was quite warm just to walk a bit, and it was extremely beautiful. A bit windy towards the end of my walk where the wind did pick up, and yeah. And I also did my grocery shopping for the week and whatnot, and I did do some reading of When Women Were Dragons, and I'm on page 98. I might do a bit more reading today, but I just want to end this vlog now, and yeah. And we see on the day of the mass dragoning how Alex and her classmates, they're told to keep their eyes down, not look up at the sky, like look down on their paper when they're doing work, while they're doing work, look down while walking, like be a good kid, and that's what Alex is. And when she gets home, her mother puts this like not thing on her wrist and tells her not to take it off before leaving for a bit. She returns with Beatrice, who she now says is actually Alex's sister, not cousin. Like when Alex tries to correct her, her mother is just so confused, kind of pretends to be confused and says, "Who's on Mara?" or whatever. Like you see how the aunt is, not aunt Myra, how the mother is starting to erase Mara. It's like as if she never existed, and we see like that her mother, Alex's mother, did have gold eyes when she didn't. Like it looks like her mother maybe started a transitioning process before she stopped, and we learn later that there were women who tried to resist the transitioning process, who tried to continue being good wives and mothers until they could no longer handle it. It was like as if their bodies were too small for them, and yeah, and like with this erasure, we see how pictures are removed and how like they stopped going to church. They only went to church because the aunt insisted. Like they even tried to get that church to not like mention the aunt's name, and when they were like compiling a list of names like who were, I guess, lost during this mass dragoning in a church, decided no, she was still part of our community, we're gonna remember her. And Alex's mother is like doing everything in her power to prevent any information about the mass dragoning or any of the dragoning from entering the house. Like she sells the TV set, she ruins the radio, she throws away the newspaper after Alex's father is done reading it. Like, she in a way is trying to, I guess, move on, like, and pretend it never happened, and doesn't want to talk about it. And yeah, and except the issue is Alex is getting information in school because of the large amount of women who like disappeared, and a large amount of families and people who were affected, and as well the number of men who were killed because, well, their wives like not gorgeous, but they ended up dead. this mass dragoning, it's different in the sense that like it cannot be swept under the rug. It has to be discussed, and we see how the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, they designed this like curriculum to try and discuss it, and we see how there's constant changes being made, and this entire thing, this entire novel, I do have to say, is Alex is telling us in the story and from the future, and the way she's reporting it, it's almost like she's giving us a report, like she's stating the facts, like we don't really get like how she is feeling, because like we can see like how she feels about certain things about the story, and changes, how she feels a bit confused initially before accepting the normal. In a way, it's being told to us, it is like she is giving us a report of all of the events that happened, and I do like that in a sense. Like we do learn that Alex did become a scientist in the future, and I'm very much intrigued to see if we will like see how she gets there because of the old-fashioned, or I guess now it would be old-fashioned thinking of her family members. Then we do jump ahead a bit to Alex being in 4th grade and her teacher bringing in this like doctor to try and explain to the children like the changes their body will go through. Like it is a thing where the boys are like kind of get a lecture from this doctor first, and then they're taken out. They're taken outside so they can like let some energy go or whatever, honestly. And then the girls are brought in, and then they're told about changes their body will make. And it's like the way the doctor is like talking about it, it's just like very like the examples he's using is very nature focused. Like he's talking about plants and other animals. Like the way he's talking about it, it's like they're shredding who they used to be and growing up and forgetting who they were when they were young children and becoming these new people that no one recognizes. And Alex, like she is confused given like how can people forget who they once were, until she sees her classmate, and her classmate is growing and changing, going through puberty. Oh, she starts wearing makeup and is getting her period again, and like pimples and whatnot, and is changing into a person that Alex no longer recognizes, which I do kind of like. And we do see Alex as she's starting going through the process of puberty, like how she's getting her first period, and it's like it is a subject no one discusses because it's very feminine. Like it's a female thing that's like almost taboo. That's like as bad as dragoning, and the dragoning is in the same category as menstrual cycles because it's a very feminine thing. Like no one wants to talk about it. Then it makes people scared and whatnot. Like I do find that interesting, and we do learn that a few days before the mass dragoning event, Mara did give Alex like a bunch of papers, like, and Alex like hid them and then look at them until years later, and it's letters that her aunt sent and received, booklets from scientists who was doing research about the whole dragoning thing, and we see a letter sent to Mara from a woman named Edith who says that the process, like she's gone through these changes and becoming a dragon because of joy, not because of some sort of trauma or because she's unhappy in life. It's like she's finding joy in it, and I just think that's interesting. And also, I have to say, Alex has a friend named Sana who she claims his best friend and whatnot. But the way Alex is describing like how she constantly wants to be around Sana and the way Sonia makes her feel, it's like, does Alex have a crush? Like, I don't know. I don't know if this book will be going into Alex exploring or figuring out her sexuality, but I can imagine, like, in the 50s, that's a subject no one's gonna really talk about. Like, I can imagine it's gonna be a situation where Alex is expected to marry a boy because, I mean, that's what she should be doing. Because, and yeah, I'm curious if something will become of that. And yeah. And we also see how it's not only Alex going through changes, it's also her mother. Like, her mother's become more and more obsessed with gardening, growing their own vegetables, like, and kind of getting upset with the father because he's not really paying attention to what's going on in the house. Like, Alex's father constantly sits at work and he puts up an air of a good family man. Like, he kisses Alex's mother and Alex when people see them, and he's humming and whistling, like, and when he's around people, pretending he's happy. And also, we see, like, how over the years Alex's mother just becomes more agitated, like fighting with the father constantly about school functions, about this, about being a good father, it seems like. And also, she's obsessed with knots, like, cause knots that bring luck and knots have different meanings. And she's obsessed with, like, making sure that Alex and Beatrice both have these knots around their wrists, even for some reason they keep coming undone, but she keeps trying to tie them. We do get this story, like, the men from, like, 780 BC who created these knots so women were obedient and women who were dragons are no longer dragons, and it seems like that could be why Alex's mother's obsessed with trying to keep her daughters obedient and trying to prevent them from becoming dragons. I'm assuming is the case. I don't know. Alex is, like, keeps asking why she wants them to wear him, and her mother just doesn't answer. So yeah, I would say I'm very intrigued to see how this book will just tackle certain issues that might be, I guess, unspoken about in the 1950s, like Alex kind of coming into her own career, going to school, I guess she did, in order to become a scientist, figuring out her sexual orientation. Like,